Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today, I have the distinct pleasure to gush over Daniel Shiffman from the coding train, from Nature of Code, from processing. I'm just such a fan of everything that you do. You are the Mr. Rogers of programming, and you bring a joy to me every time you show up on my For You page or in my YouTube, sir. I bow to your greatness. How's that for an intro?
That's a little bit much. I would say
too much.
Yeah, no, it's good. I would say maybe if there's an anxiety riddled Mr. Rogers, then maybe that's more accurate. But I appreciate the compliment, and it's an honor and a thrill to be here talking with you.
Very nice. Yes. Okay. So you'll be anxiety riddled Mr. Rogers, and I'll be the paralyzed imposter syndrome Mr. Rogers. And between us, we'll find ourselves a Bob Ross and maybe a Ted Lasso, and we'll have a bridge game ready to go.
Perfect. I love anything to do with card games. So
excellent. So people may know you who are from the internet, from the coding train. You're just kind of joyful celebration of all things creative, and you have made art, made fun with programming. You're not just the here's a for loop. You're the here's a for loop, and how can we paint with it? And now how can we make something fun and exciting with it? And now you are back with natureofcode.com. You've redone a self-published book called The Nature of Code. It was an online resource. Start a decade ago and explain what it was and then what it is today.
Yes. So So this project, actually, I would put the seeds of it all the way back to like 2001, 2002. I was a graduate student at a program at NYU. It just happens to be the program where I have a full-time teaching job right now. But I took a few different courses there. I learned to code there, actually, with, if anybody remembers, the Lingo programming language, which was the scripting language that was part of Macromedia Director. So, definitely a non-traditional entryway into code, but I think you can find the origins of processing and P5.js in many. There's many examples, but back there in Lingo, which was invented by John Henry Thompson. I'm going to have to name everybody who influenced me in this project. I'm sure I'll miss a few folks. Anyway, so that's where I took some classes there. I took a class called Dynamic Bodies which was about modeling physics with code. And then I took another class called Foundations of Generative Art Systems. I think today, if you asked, I don't know if you asked any random person on the street, what is generative art, what answer they'd give to you. But there's a much more kind of mainstream understanding of the concept of generative art. But that was very early in this idea of what does it mean for art to be made through an algorithm, through a process. So I took those. I like math and science. I never understood or never realized that those could be applied in this way towards programming to create games and art and visuals and animation. It was around that time that I started learning processing, which is a Java-based programming language and environment for creative coding. And so I started teaching processing, and I was trying to teach all that stuff that I learned in those classes. And one of the early classes that I taught at ITP when I was first teaching there, I think this was around 2008, was called The Nature of Code. And basically, I started putting together tutorials for that class. And at a certain point, after having taught it a few times and compiled all these materials, I put it into a book, which I self-published. And I was excited to experiment with the idea of publishing something that would be free and online through Creative Commons, as well as a print book that somebody could hold in their hands. And I did. It was an early Kickstarter project. I think I don't know if this is accurate, but I feel like it was definitely within the first 100 projects on Kickstarter back in late 2000s. And one of the things that I did with the book when I published it was, okay, this is going to be an online resource, free, Creative Commons licensed, self-published, and I'll be able to continually edit and update it. And anybody who downloads it or reads it online will automatically get the new version, and I can update through the print-on-demand service a new PDF, and I'm going to keep it fresh and updated. And then once it was out, I basically never did that. And I just kept... I fixed a few things here and there and updated examples, but I just kept saying like, I'm going to do a new version. I'm going to do a new version. And somehow 10 years passed and I realized I really got to get my act together. And that's when it was I was introduced to folks at No Starch Press, and I realized what I really need here. It was wonderful to do that self-publishing experience, but I really needed a partner essentially to help project manage me. I wanted to do a much higher quality book, a print book. The print on demand services have, there's advantages to that, but really the quality of the physical object itself left a lot to be desired. And I wanted to update the book for JavaScript. I've been doing most of my teaching now with a library called P5.js, which is part of the Processing Foundation ecosystem of tools related to processing. And so now I have a whole new version of the book, all with JavaScript, a brand new website. The whole thing is still online, Creative Commons licensed, but the print book is, I feel like it's this beautiful, precious, high quality object to me now, which is really what I had wanted.
Yeah, it is definitely worth calling out the friends at No Starch Press. This is not just some book. This is 640 pages. This is a coffee table book. This is a book that you can put on your coffee table. It'll hold things down. It'll keep the coffee table from floating away. If there's an intruder, you could beat the intruder to death with the book and then sit down and enjoy it.
Doorstop as well.
Fantastic doorstop. It's a big book. There's a lot here. Did you know it was going to be 600 plus pages when you started?
I didn't, in a way I had kind of thought that I might be optimizing it down to something a little bit shorter as I was updating it, because there's a lot of sections in there that required a lot of gymnastics to do things in Java that became a bit simpler with JavaScript. But there's a lot of things that are updated. Most of what's updated is just like, I learned how to explain this a little better, or I made some new examples that always work better. Because I've been teaching this class, I don't know how many times now, every year since multiple times, sometimes since 2008. So a lot of things that I had learned from teaching, I was able to refresh and add to the book. But the thing that I did that ended up probably expanding it by 100 pages is the 2012 version had this little chapter about what is a neural network. And it was very basic. I go through how to program a perceptron, which is like a single neuron, a 1950s system that is kind of the foundation of what modern neural networks are today. And then I kind of wax poetic a little bit about like, maybe you could use this for some stuff in a few different directions, but don't go much further with it. And I don't know if you've been paying attention to the tech sphere recently, but there's a lot more going on in the world of machine learning and neural networks. I'm not fully going down that rabbit hole of modern deep learning AI systems, but I completely rewrote and expanded that chapter to use an open source library called ML5, which is something that I'm also working on. It's a library for P5 to do machine learning. And then what I'm most excited about is I added an entire new chapter about this concept called neuroevolution. So it's not the top line item in the news and hype in AI and machine learning these days, but it's one of my favorite techniques. It's a sort of oddball way to train a neural network instead of using traditional back propagation with errors and data sets. It's really just about throwing volume at neural networks, making a zillion random ones and letting them evolve their weights towards a solution. And it works really well for the kinds of things. So the whole book is about like how to move little dots around the screen in all sorts of different ways. And what neuroevolution allows you to do is say, what if those dots could sort of evolve different behaviors, involve different intelligences to achieve different kinds of goals? And so to me, it's a really lightweight, fun, playful, accessible, easy to run in JavaScript in the browser with no other dependencies kind of way of getting to play with machine learning and AI. So that's what took added a couple years onto the project of like pulling all those examples and explanations together.
All right. There is a ton of to unpack there, a ton of enthusiasm to unpack. I love that. I want to emphasize, because this is an Audible podcast. People are like, I'm having trouble visualizing this. This book starts with vectors. It starts with forces. It's like, put a dot in the screen, head in that direction. And then by chapter 10 and 11, you're coding a machine learning version of Flappy Bird that learns how to flap on its own, which I think is just such a wonderful example of like starting with the base of the pyramid and building up. And at the beginning, you're like, okay, hello world is what is randomness? And by the end, you're doing neuroevolutionary ecosystem programming. That if that's your kind of fun, then the nature of code is the place to be. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I'm glad thank you for characterizing it that way, because I really put a lot of effort into trying to think. I mean, it's ultimately a textbook and it's a technical book that has explanations and code examples and diagrams. But I really tried to think of it as like a story. And like, the beginning is just the single dot moving randomly. And then it starts to follow Newton's laws. Then it starts to, be able to oscillate with trigonometry functions and so on and so forth, ending with this neuroevolution. So there's a lot of meandering tangents along the way, but I really try to follow that storyline through it, and I'm hoping that comes through for the reader and people who are making projects with it. One thing that I think is useful to add for anybody listening is this is not a beginner learn to code book. It's the whole ethos of it is to be as friendly and welcoming to anyone who sort of took a math class or has ever been intimidated by a math formula that they've seen in a physics textbook. But it does require some of the basics of programming. But what I would say is it's really, and for anybody who's one is if you read the introduction, I've got a zillion suggestions of like, oh, just watch this set of videos first, or go learn these tutorials first. You can be a beginner to programming, but it does require the sort of basics of variables, loops, conditionals, arrays, functions, objects. I don't know if I missed anything there.
No, but like to your credit, you do start in the introduction with the first line of code you see when you read this book is x equals x plus 1.
Yes.
And if you can understand that and you can go, well, that's going to send the dot in that away, it'll go. It does ramp up quickly. So like you said, it's not a learn to code book, but it is learn about your enthusiasm. This is a bottled example of Daniel Shiffman's enthusiasm. I feel like you kind of wander the earth with like knocking on doors going, have you heard the news? Have you heard the news about physics and art and math and science? And like, you know what I mean? Like, can I come in and talk to you about processing and about, P5? That joy is like, it leaks out of you in the most positive way. And it feels like this book is just such a expression of that. Do you ever feel like you're running around trying to get people to like, have you heard the news? And they're just like, I don't really care. How do I get my teenagers to care about this? Because it's so cool. Because it's physics, it's biology, it's math, it's art, it's science.
Yeah. Well, I'm, on the one hand, I agree with with everything you're saying here. I also feel like I have this point of view of like, look, I'm going to tell you about this thing that I'm really excited about and bring all of my enthusiasm to it. But it's kind of okay if you're not so.
Is it okay though? I don't think it's okay.
You could go play music. You could go outside and kick a soccer ball around. There's many aspects. Go hug. Cook food for your family. There's many aspects of life that is incredibly meaningful. And but I do think that the thing that I'm trying to do, and I think for me, what's really important is that everybody should have the opportunity to learn to code, especially, I always say like, everybody doesn't have to learn to code, but everybody should have that opportunity. And especially in the world that we're living in, where so much of our life is governed by software, it can just having the vocabulary, the understanding is an empowering thing. And so that's what I'm trying to, and I think that art and creativity and self-expression is not always the lens through which coding or computer science is taught. And so it's not the only way to do it. It's not the perfect way to do it, but it's a way that I think brings a lot of people who may have thought, oh, this is not something I'm allowed to do or can do to it. And it's nice to have something like the idea of the stuff that I teach, the way that I teach online, is like, there's no answer to this problem. It's an exploration. And so sometimes you do need that, you do need that answer. If you work for a company and you have to like release something that's not going to break, if you're trying to write software to make a, rocket ship go to the moon, there's certain stakes and thresholds there that you need to achieve. But I think when you're learning and you're exploring, that playfulness, that release of just, you don't have to know where you're going. You can let the software and the exploration drive you. That's what I try to do. And the book is hopefully an extension of that. It's a little less rambly and chaotic than my videos because, there was an editor and a process of putting it together. So, I one thing I notice, like sometimes I think a lot, I recognize a lot of people love my videos, but, there is a small percentage of like, this is too much for me. The energy is like too much. So, but the book might actually be for you if that's the case, because you can quietly read it in your own voice. So,
yeah, I have been accused as I enter I have my fourth Diet Coke of the day of maybe being a little too caffeinated, a little too excited about stuff. But what I like about this is like it starts at a bounce. Here's a dot. Let's bounce it around, and then by the end you're interacting with it. You're learning about springs and particles. And for me, it's connecting to the physical world in a way that is just really like, wow, physics is not a lie. You can predict the future.
Yeah. And the other thing, he's talking about getting kids excited about it. This is probably, the closest to a game development book or set of tutorials that it's not explicitly that. There's nothing about the sort of theory and practice of game design in it. But in terms of, if you look at, in terms of like the techniques and the algorithms that I'm going through in the book, that's something that would be excited. Anybody who's interested in making games, I think there's a lot there. That I think is one way to go through the material and think about what you want to build from reading it through.
And I also want to call back to your point about not everyone should learn to code or needs to learn to code, but you should have the opportunity. And teaching people hello world at the command line doesn't cut it anymore to get anyone excited. They've got iPads and they've got Netflix, so we got to compete.
Yeah.
But hey, I can make a game. I can bounce something around. I can interact with the real world. I can add color. In a few number of lines of code. I think processing in P5.js and tools like it allow you to do a huge amount of work in a small amount of space, like 5-6 lines of code, and you're doing a lot.
Yeah, and picking JavaScript for this book is, not the most obvious choice. And I think there's plenty of reasons you could come up with as to why you'd want to do a lot of this work in a different programming language or environment. Mm-hmm. But for me, this idea, the fact that, especially in the online version of the book, you can just click on one of the examples. Obviously, if you're reading the print text, then you just go right to the website and the code is running right there for you in a web editor. You can just change the color, change one line of code, have a new version, save it, share it with your friends. That has been so key to me. The friendliness of the P5 project and its ecosystem. This book would not be possible without all the work that went into the P5.js web editor that allows me to host all of the examples. So I think that's something that I think really, especially for a middle school, a high school kid who's getting into programming, the fact that you can work on your code at the library, on a friend's laptop, at their house, go home. If you have a computer at home, you're suddenly like have your code right there. So that was really important to me, and it is really important to me in how I teach and produce materials. However, I will give a little plug, which is that with the earlier version of the book, many people would read through it and learn the material by porting it to their own environment or language of choice. So people would do things, they made 3JS versions of all the examples, or they did all the examples in Unity. So I really want to encourage people. One, that is a way, I think, if you're not as into JavaScript, hopefully the book like really just explains. It's more, to me, it's not a JavaScript book. It's really more about the algorithms and ideas. And I would love to see what happens when people read it and kind of like recreate everything in their language of choice. And I'm hoping to compile all of the ports of all of the examples. I'm making processing versions and, hopefully going to have some C++ versions with a library called Open Frameworks. So if anybody's interested in contributing that, you can go to the website and the GitHub, and there'll be places where you can add your reports.
You've talked about things that are important to you, and I think it's worth noting that you have for 20 years given very freely. Creative Commons, right? This is a thing. Go play with it. Right now, folks can go to nostarch.com and they can purchase a lovely, giant 600-page version of this. It is a beautiful book. You should buy it. But they can also just go to natureofcode.com on their iPad. And it's right there. And you've broken it down into effectively a 14-week-long class for the autodidact out there, or the homeschooled kid, or the computer science professor at high school to build it's in a complete class. how can you're not going to get any money on that because I'm just going to go to the website and do it for free. So like, how can you be magnanimous, but also like pay your rent?
Well, there's a couple things. One is I'm very privileged and lucky to have a full-time teaching job at NYU. And, it's a incredibly, I don't even tell anybody what the cost of education, higher education here is in the US. So to me, it's important in working in that environment that is very inaccessible to so many people to be able to try to keep the materials that I do for NYU as open education. This is, yes, you could say that it's generous, but I would say that it's more like subsidized by the fact that I work. So I consider this my research and work as part of my job at NYU is to create these open education materials. The other thing that I would say, and this is kind of interesting, that, I think some publishers might, No Starch was not this. They were very excited and thrilled and willing to work with me. But some publishers might say, oh no, we don't want to release this for free, Creative Commons, because no one will buy the print book. And my experience has really been the opposite. To me, it's about the website is a way to, it's marketing, essentially. It's the free, I think some people will want the print book and they'll buy it, but lots of people are going to come to the website and find it and share it with their friends. And to me, that actually raises the reach of the book. And, I don't have any data really to back this up other than anecdotal evidence. Mm-hmm. But to me, it is not taking away from people purchasing the print book itself. It's just like creating what in my view is something that has a way for more people to access it. I will also just plug that I just recently, of course, you can pre-order or actually order the book now. It's actually being shipped already from nostarch.com, but I actually just added a Shopify system on the natureofcode.com as well. So you can people can buy the print version direct from me as well if they're so inclined.
The last couple of episodes of the show, a couple of times, this term product-led growth has come up. It's a fancy MBA term for make a product that's so delightful, people will talk about it. I feel like the nature of code goes back to the times of shareware, where it's like, look, it's free. It's so amazing. And then it's like, oh my goodness, I love it so much. I'm going to send $5 to them because I love them. You know what I mean? Give freely and the money will flow back to you is almost your vibe.
Right. And also to me, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to work with No Starch to create a really high quality print version. So yes, it's kind of but when it came to me, I was surprised. Wow, this is really heavy. Who's going to want to carry this around? But to me, there is something really, and I do this there's a book, actually it's also No Starch, Eloquent JavaScript. Speaking of things, if you want to look at before you read Nature of Code, it's a great book for, that's also I think free online Creative Commons for learning JavaScript. And I was reading it online. I was like, I just love this so much. I got to have it on my shelf so I can use it as a prop. So I think to me, the earlier, if anybody has the 2012 version of Nature of Code, I can't look that the print quality, there's these beautiful diagrams that are hand illustrated that are kind of washed out, and the paper is very kind of thin. And so the new version of the book, it has this flexi bound cover that has, you can even sort of feel the title is slightly embossed and raised. And I don't know what to call this. It has one of these pieces of cloth fabric that's like a bookmark.
Oh yeah, the bookmark with the right down the spine. That's so nice.
So those things it makes it. Yes, I'm hoping people actually want to read the physical book, but it's a nice thing to sort of to have and hold on to preciously.
I don't have any relationship with No Starch. I think that they're lovely, but I think it's cool that you found someone who cared about the little details, because it is the little details. You're always improving it. You're making sure that it's correct. This reminds me of Donald Knuth. You can go and take a look at Knuth reward check. He would personally design a reward check. If you send him a bug in his book, he's written 2,000 checks, and they're always for a couple of dollars. It's $1 or $2.56. You know what I mean? Because he cared about the books. He wanted to improve it. You get the bragging rights. No one ever caches them. They just frame them, So the point I'm making is that you appreciate the space so that you cared, and then you found a partner in No Starch Press to make you a physical artifact that cared about, honoring the work, which I thought was really cool.
I don't send people checks, although I am sending a special. I did also make a special bookmark and a sticker. So you get that if you buy the
That's good. Yes, I wasn't trying to push you into the corner where you have to start sending check. Now you Cash App everyone. No, but the point is that you're building a community around this. There's a brilliant community around P5 built out of processing. You were a co-founder of processing. Processing, you said, was a Java-based thing. P5 is kind of a reimagination or re-implementation in JavaScript?
Yeah, I think that's accurate, and I think it's important to say that it's not a port of processing to JavaScript. I think a reimagination is actually the perfect word for it. So, I have a few different videos on the coding train where I talk a bit more about the history of processing and some of these projects. There's too many details to go over in a short podcast, but the process, just to name a few key dates and people, the processing project started in 2001, created by Casey Reese and Ben Fry. They were students of John Maida at the MIT Media Lab. John Maida created something called Design by Numbers, which you could point to as kind of like one of the predecessors for processing. And it was incredibly revolutionary in my mind. There's so many reasons why, but I would say the one thing that was so revolutionary about it was this idea that when you ran your code, you pressed a play button. So this idea of compiling software was reduced to a media player, this idea of play, just the word play. So to me, that is kind of the foundational kind of aspect, and the fact that it was just this all in one place. So you just download this thing, you open it on your computer, you can type rectangle, line, point, and suddenly you're writing code and you're drawing stuff. So the reason why one of the reasons why processing used Java was because, I don't know if you remember this, I remember this, in 2001, the way that you shared your animations through the web was through a thing called a Java applet.
Good times.
Yeah, so that by the time, I think, if you get 10 years later to 2013, I can't remember when P5 started precisely, applets really had fallen out of favor. They were no longer being supported. And so Lauren McCarthy was one of the first Processing Foundation fellows. She was sort of asked the question, what would it mean to reimagine processing with today's technology, with today's web? This is over 10 years ago now. And Lauren, I think, did two things. One, this idea of reimagining processing for JavaScript in the browser was kind of key. But I think people what they really missed that Lauren did is more than just change the technology and put the ideas of processing into the browser. Processing always had a community and was always very community and documentation centered, but it was much harder to contribute as to like fix a bug or to add something to the Java-based development environment. And Lauren really took this idea of community and inclusion and breaking all of the lines between kind of user of the software and developer of the software, and really just exploded that in really beautiful and incredible ways that I think, if you look through at the P5 website and follow processing and P5 on social media, you'll see all the fruits of that labor. So to me, yes, the rectangle function, the line function, those are the same in P5 as in processing. The API is is almost identical with some kind of key differences, but P5 was really reimagined for being web first, this idea of a web editor, as well as community first.
That's beautiful. And just by the way, while you were talking, I texted John Maida. He texted me back. He said, you're a sweetheart and he appreciates you. John Maida, formerly a research professor at MIT Media Lab. He was on Hansel Minutes episode 921, if you're interested in learning more about that.
So he's at Microsoft now, is that correct?
He is vice president of design and AI.
Amazing.
Yeah.
There are many people that you could name as the beginning of all the work that I do, and he is absolutely one of them.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, there's going to be someone who very soon will do some amazing work, and they're going to say, man, that Dan Shiffman and the coding train and nature of code, that's what it all started for me. If you are interested in taking it to the next level, learning about art and generation and creativity and physics and math and all these wonderful things, I really recommend natureofcode.com. I have purchased 2 books, one to keep in the wrapper and one to keep on the coffee table from myself. We do appreciate you so much. I want to encourage folks to visit the coding train, to visit natureofcode.com, and follow Dan Schiffman everywhere that you get your digital artifacts. Thanks so much for spending time with me today, sir.
Thanks for having me. This is a real pleasure. I'm not used to being in audio form only, so I hope that I did okay. I usually survive by waving my arms around a lot, so people can know that I was doing that during this conversation.
Well, we know what I'll do is maybe I'll stick this up on YouTube as well, so then people can enjoy us frantically waving our arms and being excited, because talking to you has always got me energized and excited, and I want to go and learn more and experience more and share more with people. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
We've been chatting with Dan Schiffman, and this has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week. Oh, and by the way, if you made it this long into the podcast, make sure that you check out the show notes. There might be a coupon for the Nature of Code where you can get a discount using a special code that will be in the show notes. So be sure to check that out.